You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome everybody back to Warrior Creed. As usual, I am the radical Maajid Nawaz, and here to my left, right,
yeah.
whichever way around is the infamous Usman Raja. And our first guest today, we have two guests. Let's start with the second one because that's going to be about the riots in Nigeria amidst reports that the Nigerian government have implemented or attempted to implement central bank digital currencies or CBDCs and have attempted to eliminate cash. Well, that's led to our riots, and our guest Dominique Samuels will be joining us to discuss that issue with us after our first guest who joins us now, an old buddy of mine, Benedict Rogers. Welcome. And can you hello? Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened there. Welcome anyway. Forgive me for that. Something happened, but Ben, you're here. That's all part of the fun on this show.
It was probably the Chinese Communist Party
You
intervening.
don't understand what we've had to be through to be able to have these conversations, right? So what I was saying was that, Ben, you've written a book, and I should also begin by saying that the book has an event coming up in Parliament, which you're going to be speaking about. And so I think that let's begin there. Talk to us about the book, how long you were spent writing it and researching it, and what this event in Parliament is about. And then we want to get to the issues in the book itself.
Well, thank you. It's really great to be with you. So the book is about basically the human rights crisis across China, looking at it in all its dimensions, from the genocide of the Uyghur people that I know you, Maajid, have been deeply involved in campaigning against, but also the atrocities in Tibet, the persecution of Christians, the dismantling of freedom and democracy in Hong Kong, and the intensifying repression of civil society, dissent, lawyers, independent media in China itself, as well as forced organ harvesting, the persecution of Falun Gong. And then on top of all of that, I look at the threats to Taiwan, the Chinese regime's complicity with atrocities in two of the neighboring dictatorships, North Korea and Myanmar or Burma. And then a final chapter looking at what we do about this big challenge. And woven through the book is some of my own personal experiences. It's not intended to be a memoir. It's about the issues. But I first went to China when I was 18 years old. I traveled frequently over the years in China, lived in Hong Kong. And so I bring that personal element into it as well. And crucially, one central message of the book is that I am opposed to the Chinese Communist Party's repression and aggression, but I'm not anti-China. In fact, I'm deeply pro-China. I love China as a country. It's the regime that I want people to wake up to. And so the event in Parliament next week will be an event discussing the book and the issues around the book. I know that Sir Ian Duncan Smith, who is the co-chair of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China and has been sanctioned by China as a British MP, sanctioned by China for speaking out. He will be on the panel. Tim Lawton, who chairs the parliamentary group on Tibet, will be on the panel, and there'll be a few others as well. So that's happening next week.
One of the things that while I'm looking down is because I'm checking the posts, there's comments and stuff like that. So I'm just making sure we're listening to people's reactions as well, and anything worth reading I'll interject with. But one of the things I've been impressed with, what you've been able to do is actually get that consistent ability to get that parliamentary audience to listen to topics such as spirituality, such as human rights and individual respect for individual dignity. You've always managed to do that. You have a let's see the picture of Pope Francis behind your head, but also yourself a very long-standing activism in the spiritual rights field, both in Britain and abroad. So the fact that you've been able to marry that work with your ability to get a parliamentary audience to listen to stories that otherwise wouldn't have been given an audience is why we've been in touch for so long. Because I met you from day one of me sort of trying to set up my own venture in addressing some of these issues in my own way back then. And you've always been doing this. And you've always been consistent in doing this. And this book, I believe, is the latest installment of that. And one of the first people, Usman, that you may not know, but you will remember from my side of it, one of the first people that after my 4-day hunger strike for the Uyghur Muslim situation in Xinjiang or Turkmenistan, when I had concluded that, and you've met with the UK head of the World Uyghur Congress, and when I was at the time looking at that, one of the first people that I said Rahima should meet outside of me and the media interviews that she'd been doing, because a lot of the media interviews I sent her way, which was part of it. I said, it's a silent hunger strike. I am lending my voice to her. And it was her voice on the audio that I played in the Facebook Live video as the ticker went over 100,000 to get, that was the minimum we needed for signatures to force a debate in Parliament. And that debate did eventually happen, and it was unanimously voted that the Uyghur situation would be recognized morally as a genocide. So it was a big deal, and it kind of awoken a consciousness which hadn't been there before. And as that ticker went over 100,000, it was Rahima's voice that I played. And I had been saying up until then that, the media voices that are asking for, but she needs to have people around her that are going to show her how to get a voice connected to the people at the platforms that need to hear it. Yeah. So among the introductions I was happy to make was with Ben, because he's always been consistent in being able to do that. And obviously you, and I thank you, because at the time you referenced it as well. We shared an interest in that, in your support for what I was attempting to do on my side with that topic. So you were there then as well for that. So we want to thank you for that.
No, well, thank you for what you did then and what you continue to do. I think, the Uyghurs really need our voices and continue to need our voices, because although Parliament has recognized it as a genocide, so have both the previous US administration and the current US administration. Probably the only issue that Democrats and Republicans in the US agree on, and a number of other parliaments. Still, there's much more work to do. So really appreciate everything you've been doing.
So Usman, you saw from my side of some of the work, and on the other side there was introductions like Ben's that were trying to, because you come from a community like that, English isn't your first language. You've met Rahima Usman, right? She's she shouldn't be doing this. She's a traditional Uyghur folk singer. She's an artist. She's a poet. I've seen her perform traditional Uyghur music, and she's spoken to you about that, Usman. You met her son, right?
Yeah.
She shouldn't be doing this work. And so she's had to learn how to speak a different language, and then in that different language, how to speak to people perhaps that have particular terminological sensitivities, or a particular subset of the language, such as political language that they might speak. And so, go on, Usman.
Well, Ben, what I was going to ask you is, when did you start seeing this forced homogenization coming in with the Chinese regime, so to speak? And before we get on to that point, because what we have to do with this is, I hate going into a conversation without nuance. So the perspective being from the point of view that when we look at things internationally, we have to recognize the fact that within all of these different regimes that we're seeing, or the battle of philosophical stances from whichever point of view, and we have the Chinese social credit system, where when you analyze it, what you start getting when you look at it from a historical perspective is like a hyper Confucianism, in a sense, that you've got this concept of remember, if they're talking about we're representing the Han tradition, which is the argument of homogenizing the entire culture of what they consider China to be. They're saying, okay, the Uyghurs sit outside of our Han tradition, which is based within Confucianism, where they ignore Islamic scholars like Shangzi, who wrote about the fact that, well, in fact, we're probably the most Confucian because of the Sharia that they were following 1,000 years ago within China. But the point being with this, that when we look at this homogenization coming in here, but we're also seeing this debate happening between traditionalism and the hyper liberalism with the debates that are happening within semantics with transgender and modernism and all of this, and then with Putin on the other side with the traditionalism that Dugan's talking about. So, but what we get with China with this specifically is this concept of hyper Confucianism coming in, which I dare say is something that we're seeing that same credit system creeping into our system now as well, which is quite an interesting concept, because if you look at that hand in hand with capitalism from the point of view of the technology that it takes to install a credit system. I mean, I've got Hicks security camera system on my house, which I didn't realize that I had until I met Raheem, and had to go around and say, okay, well, I'm just going to have to deal with whatever's going on here. But the point being with this, coming back to the point, when did you see that homogenization coming in? Being someone who lived in China and seeing it creep in, because this is an obvious step away from. Yeah, people blame it on Marxism, but you have to look at it historically and look at the roots of it and see that there's a strand of it that historically makes sense as well from when you look at the Chinese philosophical stance. So, and obviously the fact that it's so muscular, being that the Chinese look at it from a blank slate theory rather than genetic inheritance. So that idea of enforcing it here to get harmony in. So
Ben, you've lived in China, and how's your Mandarin these days? Is it rusty?
It's rusty now, yes.
Yeah. So I'd like you to reflect on some of what Usman has said, but also add your own thoughts on perhaps some of the cultural and spiritual dimensions of this. I've announced both in my tweet that for people to join us now with the live link, that we're having a conversation around what I'm calling the persecution of the spiritual minorities under the CCP, because I interpret what's going on in China as a persecution on Tibetan Buddhists, say, for example, Chinese Christians, and also the Uyghur Muslims, as sharing a spiritual element. That I suspect the CCP or the Han dominant group would be happier if they remained very much assimilated as ethnic Uyghurs, but adopted a bit in the laissez-faire French way that the CCP sort of broader social constructed culture. And spirituality can act as a permanent barrier to that, as we learned during the COVID lockdowns, where when they attempted to close the spiritual centers, it was largely those that had a centered grounding that were the most vocal in challenging a lot of this. I noticed that across both sides of the Atlantic. So what are your reflections on Usman's points, considering, from your living there and also your own work on spiritual rights among minority communities? Is that a correct way of looking at it or framing it?
Absolutely. I think it definitely is. I have a whole mix of reflections. I mean, I think the CCP has kind of mixed together in a sort of unholy mix, a hijacking of Confucianism, a fueling of Han nationalism and chauvinism, still a heavy dose of communist ideology that the Communist Party is built on, but also a hijacking of modern technology, which Usman alluded to, and capitalism, and using modern technology and capitalism both against the different peoples in China, but also against ourselves by holding us to ransom, by using surveillance technology, and so on. In terms of when I first noticed this happening, I mean, I guess it's been happening in phases, because it's important to point out that in the case of both the Uyghurs and the Tibetans, effectively the CCP invaded their lands, East Turkestan and Tibet, way back at the beginning of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Then there was the Cultural Revolution, where everybody in China was targeted with horrific violence and repression. But then there was the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, where things opened up a bit in China and became a little bit more relaxed. And I interviewed Uyghurs, for example, for my book, who said we could live under Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin or Deng Xiaoping, the three previous leaders before Xi Jinping. Yes, we faced some level of persecution, some level of repression, but it was tolerable. So I mean, they weren't free, but it was, in their words, livable. But basically, under Xi Jinping, he has really intensified and kind of turbocharged all these elements of Han nationalism, the hijacking of Confucianism, capitalism, and reinvigorated the ideological communist element. And basically, the Communist Party of China is intolerant of any belief system, political or spiritual, but in the context of this conversation, spiritual, that causes people to have a loyalty to something bigger and better than the Communist Party.
Do you know why I didn't say political? Because I'm aware, obviously, that they're, I mean, the CCP will obviously not tolerate, nor will Xi Jinping tolerate political dissent, right? So why did I say spiritual? Because I see the without, if our hearts aren't alive, then political dissent isn't possible.
Yeah.
And spirituality is what sustains that sense of self and consciousness and life force, which all politics, with everything I disagree with and agree with, emanates from. If you're dead inside, you're not politically active at all. So that's why I used the word spiritual, because I see that the ultimate aim, again, back to the UK and my reflections on COVID, the ultimate aim of the propaganda, the now acknowledged military grade psychological propaganda. I was just thinking of the phrase I used on Rogan. That was the phrase, military grade psychological propaganda on our population. They're now acknowledged. And you realize that actually the aim was to stop our critical thinking, which you can't be politically active if you don't have. And the thing that I noticed was that, and this is regularly the case, from my experience, I've seen it, the thing that gives you the most strength or courage in a time like that, when totalitarian institutions all around you are coming at you or attempting to suffocate you, is a belief in a higher ideal. That is what keeps the soul alive in times like that, in my experience. And I've been in the worst when it comes to that. So it's why I use that word. I think it's important to acknowledge that, and your life reflects that too. And that's what, hence the. So that's about the photo behind you then.
Well, first of all, I entirely agree with you, and I absolutely right. The photo behind me is from when I was privileged to meet Pope Francis a few years ago. But I wanted just to come back to what you were just saying, because a few years ago there was a Christian pastor who's now in prison. I think he's serving 10 years in prison, and he was someone who had been a lawyer, became a Christian, became a pastor, and then actually began speaking out because of his spirituality against the CCP's repression. And he used a phrase in an open letter that he published, knowing that he was probably going to go to jail, where he said that the CCP has launched a war against the soul. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. And interestingly, the former US ambassador for international religious freedom, Sam Brownback, also used a very similar phrase that the CCP was at war with faith, and that applies to all faiths. Islam in the case of the Uyghurs, Christians, Tibetan Buddhists, Falun Gong.
Now, Usman, outside of everything that Ben has just described, a war on the soul. See, we started seeing and as you know, because you were around, my voice became louder on this from the Uyghur genocide on, with Priti Patel and all that. That was before the COVID stuff. I was trying to raise certain topics. So you've seen that, but you've ended up seeing that war on the soul came upon us in the West.
Yeah, well, what we saw with
it's almost a mirror of what's going on. We've watched it come like a speeding bullet train, come from there and then land on us too.
Well, what we're seeing with this is what we have to recognize, and this is something that goes beyond the analytical thinking that we've been trained to have. So we need to look at it from a systems perspective, is that there's a recognition now that within this fourth industrial revolution, that if you push a button here, the information is going to go over there. Yeah. So the global war on terror aided the homogenization, the forced homogenization of the Uyghurs to go in and use the idea of Islamic extremism.
Yeah.
But if I was sitting at the CCP and wanting to argue my point, I would say, okay, look, we're going to put shoes on everyone's feet. We're going to put a roof over everyone's head. Our economy is the one where the standards have been raised the fastest internationally. So unlike so if I'm pointing at the rest of the world, I'd say, okay, you've got crime, you've got hunger, you've got immorality. And what we're achieving over here is we're achieving full stomachs. And as soon as you take away appetite, now remember, when we're talking about spiritual, the concept of spiritual is this spirit. Yeah, everyone throws the word out there. We all throw the word spiritual out there. But when we start looking at this, we start saying, okay, well, actually, the concept of spiritual is about being in a present state and connecting with the infinite, with the source in the moment. Now, if I'm playing devil's advocate for Winnie the Pooh, and I know he doesn't like to be called Winnie the Pooh, but that's what I call him. I've even forgotten the guy's name. But for Winnie the Pooh over there, I would argue that what I'm doing here is I'm actually creating harmony. This is what Confucian argues for. That the Confucian argument is outwardly, as soon as you create harmony, like Kant's, and I don't agree with Kant's point about reason because reason's an outward thing, but like Kant's argument for reason, Confucian's argument for intrinsic spiritual balance through harmony is something that you can argue is the CCP's end point. Now, when you argue from a point of view of consequence, we've got variable implementation of consequence around the planet, haven't we? We're seeing this. We've seen it over here in the UK. When we were supposed to travel to the US, Maajid, then I couldn't get my booster done. Within the 4-week period, I had to wait whatever time it was.
This is why I asked you the question, because see the way he's just addressed that point. It was what discussion I hope we were going to have. Sorry to interrupt. I'm coming right back to you. Is because it's literally the mirror. We're seeing the mirror of everything that was the concern here. Our own people were doing upon us as well, or attempting to. And this is the point he's going into. So it's like that can be justified this way, and this can be justified that way, and really. We need to exit this.
And is this our own people, Ben? Because my thing with this is I've always had this, and I said this to Maajid, I've grown up I was an army cadet at the age of 13. We've got a joke around our area that they brainwash you into patriotism over here, and you have it at the ground level over here, And I still make that argument that the thing that we have in Britain is a concept of goodness for goodness sake. No transaction. You open the door for the old lady, the woman, that you give up your seat for the pregnant woman. And in fact, if someone came up to you and offered you money at that point, you would feel offended. If someone said, okay, here's some money for doing that, it's goodness for goodness sake. And that's what, even in our rebellion, we had that. Yeah, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it had that in the, it was always a rebellion for something better. What we get to now, though, is we're getting to a point now where what we see happening in China is happening internationally. We see this point where is there any level of standard morality culture that's actually sacred, or is it something that where unless we agree with whatever evolution of whatever niche they want to create for us to buy out of, unless we agree to that niche, we get the consequences of that. And like you can see, you met the Pope. The Pope, a job that no one would envy, being the spiritual guide and having to navigate through a system where you're trying to say, okay, look, okay, guys, let's agree with this. We'll do this, but try and satiate that. Once you've satiated that appetite, come to the table, because pure water is always what you want. But right now, go and have that glass of Coca-Cola. But if you keep drinking the Coca-Cola, you're going to be dehydrated. It's not actually going to satiate your appetite. It's going to make you more thirsty. And the problem we get with this is that it's almost like that. It goes into the avenue of the zealots, doesn't it? But like when you start discussing with these zealots, we end up with the eschatological prophecy in front of us. But trying to rewind it back to the point of this, it's the point with this is that what I'm seeing is that China have taken the graffiti, they've taken the hip hop music. In fact, I hate to say this, Maajid saw my collector Dragon Ball Z anime trainers limited edition that my wife bought me from China, that are the most comfortable pair of shoes that I've got, and I feel guilty wearing them, but they really are the best engineered pair of basketball boots.
The difference is, no. The difference is, I went out and bought a pair of the only Doc Martens that are still made in Britain. There's only one factory, right? And in that video, I've got to tell this story. In that video that I mentioned at the beginning with Rahima and the Facebook Live and the ticker going over 100,000, there was a shoe in the video, right? And people were like, "Oh, Maajid, what was the shoe there for?" I said, "You idiots, don't you remember when people would throw shoes at the occupiers in like Iraq and stuff, right?" So I said, this was a shoe in the age-old Arab custom of throwing a shoe at the tyrant, right? Yeah. That's why there's a bloody shoe in the shot, you idiots, right? And it happens to be a Doc Marten because it was a British shoe, because I'm British, obviously. And it was the only one that was made from the factory. There was only one factory remaining that was the factory of Made in Britain. And that was the one from that factory. And all the rest, Doc Martens have outsourced to China. That's why I had to tell that story. But all the shoes are going over there.
But Maajid, this is the point, isn't it? That if we're really truthful about this, we're taught what we want.
Yeah.
We're always taught what we want. It's like even the idea of the concept of freedom and democracy and liberalism, as when it was good, it was, when we had Monty Python, and they would challenge the status quo, that's different. That's a different, There was a level where there was a bit of intelligence in it, and my English there's an English teacher from God knows, it's like 30 years ago, and I met him, and I said to him, "How are the kids nowadays?" And he goes, "Oh, they're terrible." And I said, "Yeah, but we were rebellious as well." And he said, "No, but you were rebellious with character." Yeah, back in those days. But the point I'm coming to with this is that China they've figured out you can teach the people what they want. All you've got to do is, once you homogenize it, you can teach them what they want. And the problem I'm seeing, exactly what Maajid, the point that Maajid just made, and it's a scary point with this, is that instead of creating the characters that would change the world, we're now creating automatons that will wear exactly. I had this discussion with my little brother the other day, Maajid. Why are you buying Nike Air Jordans? Because my friends bought them. But why would you buy exactly? Because when we were growing up, it was about having something different. It was about having something unique. But once you get to that, you get to that point of creating the drone, so to speak. And then the argument then comes in. If we're dealing with the isms, the Marxism, the fascism, the liberalism, the Islamism, all of these isms they're products of our philosophical evolution in the West, mixed in, and the Chinese have recognized something quite intelligent there from that perspective, because you've got Confucianism, where you could argue that outwardly you will create, the end point of this will be harmony, and there's another level of spirituality that you can reach there collectively. I remember, I'm playing devil's advocate here, by the way, and in the West, what we've got now is we've got us scrambling away and becoming terrible banana republics, where we're holding on to our identity from a localized perspective, from our local communities, from the individuals that are around us. Because, like I said when we started this year, we've got chancellors that aren't paying their taxes. Do you see what I mean? And it's a sad state of affairs that we find ourselves in right now.
So Ben, on the note of mirroring the experience, I mean, have you noticed any of the encroaching of the technocratic side of this into our lives in your journey, in your observations?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, just on the point about the CCP seeing their objective as to bring harmony, in inverted commas, I 100% agree. And there's an excellent book by a German journalist about the surveillance state in China, and it's called "We Have Been Harmonized." And it's well worth reading. But yes, I definitely see it here. I mean, it seems to be just incredible that until very recently, there were Chinese-made security cameras in government buildings, as Matt Hancock found out to his misfortune. It was revealed recently that there were surveillance technology in government ministers' cars. I worry a lot about the continued prevalence of TikTok, and despite all the publicity about TikTok's association with the genocide of the Uyghurs, of the surveillance state in China, as well as questions about what TikTok will do with our personal data, people don't seem to be showing any signs of coming off TikTok. And I also think we've become addicted to cheap goods that are made in China, and we're in danger of prioritizing cheap consumer products over our values. Although I would hope that if more people realize that these products were made by slave labor in the supply chains of multinational brands, I would hope more people might might stop buying them. And I don't know how much of it is addiction, how much of it is lack of knowledge. But yes, I think the Chinese state is in our lives in this country in all those ways.
Do you know what though, Ben? Let's take it a stage deeper and look at some of the causes here. Yeah, we've got because for a long-term solution to come about to this problem you've raised, which I, by the way, have every sympathy with, which is hence the British-made Doc Martin in the screen, right? From the only factory left, which I found heartbreaking. Obviously, we're of the same generation. Well, so I remember those Doc Martin boots, and it was like, you know, the whole thing was with those boots laced up and then the kind of adhere trousers. It was all part of the hip hop scene as well, you know, with the long boots. But anyway, I digress. The merger, what I've noticed is the merger of corporatism in the West with this harmony-seeking technocracy of the CCP. And I mean merger to a point now where they're almost indistinguishable. What is distinguishable is the depth to which it's penetrated the various populations. But its tech, its aims, its means, its designs, they're very similar, and they're being rolled out globally, not just by the CCP, but where the tech originates is one of the problems, but not the only problem, because of course our own states are becoming more like that through the encroaching of the surveillance state to a point where, obviously, as you know, Ben, Usman and I come from this sector where even national security is no longer sacred.
Yeah.
The word terrorism is being thrown around in a form of mission creep on political dissent, and it's become absurd that the institutions themselves are beginning to reflect this permanent mission in one direction. Yeah. So in that sense, the solution to the problem here of the cheap goods, if you look at it through the lens of corporatism, they're doing the same thing. And so who's really the source of it? You can never answer that question. It's, you know, the drive for profit and the drive for harmony, which I think they've taken a bit of both, to be honest, because that's how you maximize profits, right? Yeah. Homogenization maximizes the product's ability to appeal to the most amount of people. And so that's what you do, right? So it's hard to pinpoint the blame. I'm saying, yes, what you've raised is a problem, but bring it back to the values, which I'm happy you mentioned. Those values that, if we don't have any values, then what do we expect? Yes, I absolutely agree with that. Allow me to build on it and say, then culturally, then we've got to start discovering those values more in our communities, in our own daily lives, in a way that begins emanating those values, if that's what we think is going to allow for that life force to manifest in the kind of innovation that would require for the modern day version of Doc Martens to emerge from Britain and have British made factories, because also that can't happen from a vacuum. It has to come from those values which are inspired by that life force, or that being alive inside, not being dead, which is the homogenization. Yeah. So yes, I agree with you, but then we as a country have got to take a lot more seriously the beating heart of those values, of the connection that the being in a present state, that connection to that life force. We've got to nourish it. We've got to value it, and that's where I believe that, in the sense when he said you're being taught what you want, the TikTok thing is when you remove all values from a product, it will literally appeal to the lowest common denominator. So the problem there is twin. One is you've got a value neutral piece of technology that if actually I try to build values into it, I become Hitler, right? Because it's that powerful. Maybe Hitler's the wrong analogy, it becomes Sauron. I unify the rings, yeah? Because it becomes that powerful. So if I try and build values into it, I'm the problem. So you've got a valueless tech. And so in the long term, what we've really got to be looking at is what are we demanding from this neutral piece of machinery, and what are we projecting onto it? So Chat GPTI is what we project our own biases into something that, and I've followed it very closely because in my own friend circles, I've got people that work on the most senior level you can imagine in the AI sector, right? We've been talking about this. And when it first came out, it was hailed as this great miracle of modern day deep mind tech that's able to. Within a few blooming weeks, if you follow Ben, it starts. You ask it, for example. Here's the latest one. Yeah, you ask it to imitate Seinfeld in his comedy, and it gave a perfectly beautiful response. It asked it to imitate Dave Chappelle, and it says, "Sorry, I won't imitate offensive comedians." Right. So what we've done there is we have taken a piece of tech and tried to steer it with our limited, valueless arrogance, thinking that we can control the one ring. Yeah. So I view it the opposite. I don't think the problem is that we need to inject values into the one ring, though of course there are limits to everything. Yeah. This is not me saying let's allow all sorts of criminal acts on the internet. This is me saying humility is the answer here. We don't know the answer of what we should program this thing to think like, because it's only ever going to be a reflection of our problems, right? So the humility is to look at ourselves. And when we look at ourselves, we realize we've lost those values, which is why we didn't raise our children to choose to seek their own sustenance through some product that nourishes their souls. And instead we've left them, we've neglected them. So the most popular app for children is obviously TikTok. So put aside our geopolitical, strategic, military, put aside I'm a father today and I've got to do something about this today. And Maajid, your philosophy is great, but what about stopping it now? Yeah, I'm with you. I'm also not a nihilist, yeah? But I'm saying as we are activists, as we care for trying to do day-to-day things to make the world better, let's also acknowledge that there's a deeper problem here. Why are our children on TikTok in the first? Where are the parents? What's going on with the way we're raising kids and educating them? Because if we raise them right, then you end up in a situation where they're passing their GCSEs at 13 years old, for example, right? Real life examples. And they have their best friends, for example, will be their parents, their cousins, their brothers, their family, their sisters. They will be raised in a holistic, humane, community-based way, and they'll be grounded. They won't go to those apps in the first place. Now, I'm not saying, let's ignore the apps, obviously, right? That's, again, to emphasize that. I'm saying we've got to also really, really do something about what I have come to refer to as our past, which is ahead of us. That sounds confusing. Our past, which is ahead of us. And this is a Bedouin's way of looking at time, yeah? Because in the days when language really meant something, because it's literally you're using symbolism to describe a thing that could mean life or death in the desert. So you better be able to identify this thing properly, understand all of its consequences in a way that we can't imagine, right? Because they were illiterate. It was literally the language that was what was allowing them to survive and communicate to each other before writing. And their past was ahead of them. What do I mean by that is that because it's all survival, the thing you leave behind is your children. That's your future, right? What you leave behind is your future, your lineage, your children, right? And we place our past ahead of us to do that, meaning our traditions, our value system from our ancient heritage is what we keep ahead of us, which is our past, because that's what we leave for our children. Say, follow this. Yeah. So the Bedouin's way of looking at it is your past is ahead of you. It's not behind you. Your future is behind you. It's what you leave behind as you travel through. Yeah. But what you're going to leave when you're dead is if you do your job correctly, is a respect for your traditions, your ancient lineage, so that's what your children can follow. That's where we've fallen short in response to the point that Usman just made. Yeah. That it's great. Let's fight every day to stop these apps. But we've got to also do something on the demand side to make sure that, because, as we know, tinkering with the apps can be just as dangerous, right? So we put age verification on it to stop young children getting on TikTok because there's abuse on there. Okay, I'm going to put age restriction on it, but now I've just basically destroyed anonymity online, which means political dissidents in Iran or China can't work because now everyone has to have digital ID. So every time we try and tinker with it, and I know I use that example on purpose, Ben, by the way, please lodge this because it's going to come up in Parliament. They're going to try and bring in digital ID using child porn, for example, as a very valid reason. Yeah, a very valid reason. I care for that, and my work on challenging the grooming gangs is self-evident. I don't need to justify myself on that, right? But what I'm saying is we've got to make sure we're not becoming patsies, because what happens is they will use a very valid point of anger, like they did with terrorism in the war on terror. And then the maneuver is to say, right, that's why we need mandatory digital ID online. If you think about that, tinkering is because it's a recognition is a problem, yeah? But it's seeking the solution in other than ourselves. It's seeking the solution in regulation. And the problem with that regulation is it always has a dark side, the mirror opposite to what you want to achieve. The inversion of that is, as I said, that means everyone is identifiable in China that you care about, such as the Tibetan Buddhists, the Muslim Uyghurs, the Chinese Christians, because we've just conceded the point that anonymity doesn't deserve to be online. Right? So we've got to think clearly about how we're behaving in the long term. And I don't have the answers. What I do know is that to be humble and know we don't have the answers means we seek a higher consciousness, because that's something which, you know, the humility will tell that we don't have all the answers, but if the heart's in the right place, we try and, you know, nourish that and guide it. And this finally reminds me of a passage, Usman, which is Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. So this is the prophetic Arabic. This is a Quranic scripture from traditional Arabic, and it's in the Quran as well. It says, Allah won't change the situation of a people hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim, until they change what is within themselves. The decline that I'm witnessing, I want to throw this back to you both. I know I've spoken for a while. The decline I'm witnessing is first and foremost, a spiritual decline. And that's why I describe this as a spiritual war. Sorry for the long interjection there.
No, well, I there's a lot in there, and I entirely agree. And two particular thoughts come to mind, actually, from kind of the offline world, where these issues are very much a concern, as well as being in the online world. Two unrelated points, but both relate to what you've just said. One is I always think when it comes to the whole issue of no platforming and censoring and cancel culture, my view generally, I mean, of course, maybe on the extremes of the issue, there perhaps is a place for legislation, but in general, I've always been of the view that it's much better to counter hate speech with good speech rather than with bad law. And I heard Chris Patton articulate this recently in relation to the whole pulling down statues of people who've done things in the past that, of course, we in our generation might not approve of, but better to counter hate speech with good speech than with bad law or bad measures. The other example, in a separate context, but related to this whole issue of values and what are the values that shape our society, and coming back to China, I was genuinely shocked. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but I was really shocked to see recently that the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, not the one who didn't pay his taxes, but another one, Philip Hammond, wrote an article in the China Daily, which of course is the CCP's propaganda outlet, saying we should get back to business as usual with China, post COVID, post all the challenges of the last few years, get back to business as usual, prioritize trade, and ignore what he called the background noise. And what he meant by background noise was the genocide of the Uyghurs, the dismantling of Hong Kong's freedoms, the atrocities in Tibet, the persecution of Christians. And if you have a public figure, okay, he's out of government, but still he was, fairly recently Chancellor of the Exchequer, effectively trashing our values of freedom and democracy, and especially of the importance of the soul, of spiritual freedom, and becoming what Lenin once termed a useful idiot by effectively doing the CCP's job for them, then that's a serious threat to our values from within our own society.
So, did that result in anything in particular? What's the status quo at the moment? Have you been following it? Where are we on, our relations there on a day-to-day level?
Well, I think we are. I think the British government's position on China is confused and confusing, because on the one hand, Rishi Sunak, in the leadership election last year, knowing that Liz Truss actually was taking quite a strong position on China, himself presented himself as a kind of more of a China hawk than he had previously been. In government, he's sending out mixed messages, because he talked tough about the spy balloons. He has talked tough about Confucius Institutes, but at the same time, it's clear that he wants to strengthen the trading relationship, and there's talk about ministerial visits to China. And there was even the governor of Xinjiang, where the Uyghur genocide is taking place, was going to come to the UK a week or so ago, and Foreign Office officials were going to meet him. And it was only thanks to a concerted campaign by people like Rahima and others, and I was a little bit involved, that ended up the governor of Xinjiang cancelled his visit. But I would say that the government's position currently is, I don't think it will go back to the so-called golden era that existed under David Cameron. I think politically that's just
Osborne. So Usman,
exactly.
just on a, sorry to cut you there, Ben, I'll come back, but just so you're right. So that golden era period, if you remember when Xi Jinping came to Britain and Cameron and went to the pub and Cameron had a pint, Osborne was seen as a bit of a mastermind behind that strategy. And Osborne then got a job on the board of BlackRock. And I mention that because I'm aware you've been looking at BlackRock.
Yeah.
So sorry for the interjection, but that whole policy struck us as being designed by the very people we're critical of on the COVID side of the mandates, the whole sort of what I call globalist international finance.
I think what's coming up here is we've got questions that have come up that really come down to that point of like, what is culture? Yeah. If we're going to get, because these are the questions that need to be asked. If we're trying to defend something, then does TikTok exist within China in the way that it exists over here? No, it doesn't. You don't get to sit in China and validate yourself in the same way and get the same likes. They haven't got a whole generation that's suffering from a nihilism where there's no deference given to any authority, which is what we've got going on in the West right now. So that's China on one side. Then we've got Russia on the other side, and with a concept of traditionalism where they're securing the regions of Orthodox Christianity and the regions of Naqshbandi Sufism in the Caucasus, and the idea of traditionalism where the cultures are kept alive, but there's an idea of citizenship. Now, I'm not advocating any of this because I think it's all part of anyone that thinks they know how to cure the problem. It's a complicated issue, but the question mark still comes up. What are we defending when we're actually seeing it happen? They're pouring boiling water on the salt mountain of British culture, and we're watching it go down the drain. And what we're ending up with is like new ideas and new commercial niches being brought in with intersectional identities where I can be a dinosaur and talk about how we have been oppressed and told that we were extinct for the last 65 million years, but now I'm back, and you have to agree with and I'm purposely using an example like that because that's how ludicrous it's got now, where we're having the semantics of words being changed. You change the semantics, you change the environment. You change the environment, you change the culture. And we've got dangerous ideas that are being brought in, and China's telling to us.
Even further, you dissolve the culture.
Yeah, you've dissolved the culture, and this is the thing, Ben. over the last few months on Warrior Creed, we've had different guests, and we're all of the opinion trying to defend something that we grew up within, which I think, does have this. You grow up from the perspective of being the good guy. I've got the work I did in counterterrorism, where we defended the nation. It was done with that, with the idea within the self that you're defending your nation. And my other friends that joined the military or joined we all did it to be the good guy. But the problem that happens now is that where we live now, we start to see nihilism celebrated at the highest level, whereas other nations now are becoming more organized. I mean, what we see with the Russian Federation, what we see with China, we're criticizing, but they're like, don't worry about those guys over there. They don't even know what they're doing.
Anyway, I've got Ben, if you can give us your last thoughts on this stuff, mention your book again, because our next guest, Dominique Samuels, is waiting in the room, and she's kindly.
Ben, where are you located? Sorry, are you located in London or?
I'm in London. Yes.
You know what has to be done there, Maajid?
Yeah, we're gonna have a curry, Ben. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. So
I'm gonna text you because Usman and I meet for training anyway. And then what we'll do is we'll take you to an East London curry house, and we'll carry on this conversation.
Yeah, carry on this conversation.
Before I let you go, though, I do want to give you an opportunity to wrap up your thoughts, mention your book again, and where it can be read, and if there's any other call you'd like to make to our viewers. And then we want to thank you for joining us, and we'd love to see you again. And definitely.
Fantastic. Well, I really look forward to the curry. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this has been an amazing, fascinating conversation. I would just say that the Chinese Communist Party is a clear threat to the free world. But as part of countering that threat, we need to re-examine ourselves as well and get back to the values that we believe in. And my book is an attempt to do that. It ends with a final chapter that outlines things that governments could and should be doing. People can get the book from bookshops, from Amazon. I would encourage people, if they don't get it through Amazon, to order it through Waterstones or any other bookshop, because if you order it through a bookshop, that then means it'll be on the shelves, and then more people will see it. So if people would like to do that, that would be great.
More importantly, it's a real book then.
Yeah,
exactly. That's right. So it's called The China Nexus, and thank you so much for having me today and for this
pleasure.
It's always a pleasure. We hope to see you again, and definitely let's organise it. It's usually it will be sometime soon. We'll get it together, and usually it's in East London if that's convenient for you.
That's fantastic. I really look forward to it.
Definitely look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us. Right. Well, everybody, we are going to go to our next guest, and that's Dominique Samuels, who, as well as being a regular commentator on various broadcast platforms, has been very vocal in her own independent platforms that she has, in other words, in challenging a lot of the collective madness that has overtaken not just our political class, but appears to be also our society, from the COVID mandates through to the craziness in the war in Ukraine and the ever escalating and embarrassing spectacle of an arms race that our politicians seem absolutely uncritical about, right through that to central bank digital currencies as well. I'm very, very happy actually that I've been following Dominique's work, and she's been hitting all the right buttons, which is why, to tell you frankly, and this is not something that we're saying behind Ben's back, Ben knows this too, we asked Dominique to lead the show today because it's a very important topic on Nigeria and the reports of an attempt by the government there to get rid of cash, which we've been warning you is coming. And this is it's very current, and it's another topic that Dominique intervened into or waded into that debate. So here she is. She's going to join us now, and that's Dominique Samuels. Welcome, Dominique.
Thanks
How
for
you
having me,
doing, Dominic?
guys. How
All
are
good,
you?
all good. Now,
Good,
you
good.
can't join us for beyond, you're saying 10, 15 minutes. So thank you anyway for joining on. This isn't the formal show, which you may have seen, the Radical Show. That's between seasons at the moment. This is the more casual in the bunker, having a real go at some of the day-to-day issues like this cash situation in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. What's going on?
So, really, really chilling because just as for a bit of context, governments all around the world are looking at implementing their own digital currency. These are called CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, designed to counter the sort of freedom and anonymity that is associated with, your run-of-the-mill cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, like Bitcoin. And in this particular case, CBDCs are already being experienced in places like Asia, in places like Africa. That's where they usually trial these things. It's where they trial their vaccines and their social experiments. And in this particular case, Nigeria has gotten a taste of what I refer to as CBDC hell. So they became the first country in Africa in October 2021 to introduce their own e-Naira. Now, bear in mind, they banned Bitcoin. They're introducing their own cryptocurrency called the e-Naira. And since then, the vast majority of Nigerians do not use it. They have a population of hundreds of millions. People are not using it. Cash is still the preferred transaction of choice
When you say, sorry to cut you there, when you say ban Bitcoin, obviously you mean they banned any ability to connect to the exchange, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't actually ban the coin. So Nigerians can't access Bitcoin services.
Yeah, that's what I mean, more specifically. I mean, which is an effective ban on Nigerians, using Bitcoin, which is ironic because they're introducing their own digital currency. Odd. But since then, most people are not using this e-Naira. A lot of people actually are looking at the government with distrust. I mean, the Nigerian government has sort of a murky background. So why would they trust the government to track and trace all of the transactions? Doesn't make sense. Conveniently, the Nigerian central bank announced that they were going to get rid of all their old cash notes, and you're going to have to trade in your old cash notes for new cash notes. And they gave a ridiculous deadline for this, I think within a month, for everyone to be able to do this. And surprise, surprise, what has happened? You've got queues, people queuing outside of ATMs. You've got people rioting. They don't have any cash for their businesses. They can't really participate in their day-to-day lives because of this cash crisis, because of this deliberate cash shortage. And when you actually examine the reasons why the central bank did this, surprise, surprise. Number one, they said it was to keep us safe from bandits and people that, kidnap people and demand ransoms, usually using cash. But then on this Guardian article I was reading as part of my video, at the end, what do we find? That it's also part of a push to limit the amount of cash that's used in transactions. And the head of the Nigerian central bank said that what he wants is for cash use in Nigeria to basically go to zero. Sinister stuff.
Do you think there is enough of an opposition to this, from what you've been following, that this is going to be stopped in its tracks, or is any opposition to this in the context in which it occurs in Nigeria just going to be ignored? So, for example, the way in which in Oxford, the 15-minute city thing was just completely trampled over. They just ignored all of the protesters in Oxford, as they did during lockdown, right? Which they didn't even show on the BBC, the anti-lockdown protesters behaved as if they didn't exist. Now, is that what will happen in Nigeria's case as well, do you think?
Yeah, I think, let's just be honest about it. That is what is going to happen, and it is what happens. My concern is that I'm wondering what it will take certain people to actually realize that there's something odd going on here, because at every turn you've got people defending these measures, defending things like 15-minute cities. They don't care about the ramifications. They think it's about climate change. With regards to CBDCs, they'll be like, oh, well, I don't use cash anyway, so this is great. Despite the fact we already have, in the context of the UK, we already have a brilliant structure for contactless payments, credit card, debit card payments. What exactly is the problem that CBDCs are a solution to. I'm struggling to find what the actual issue is here. So there's no reason for them even to be introduced in the first place. Secondly, I'll say that what governments seem to be doing to create a mirage of democracy is they invite these consultations, right? Yeah. So in the case of CBDCs, there's currently a consultation ongoing. The government is inviting responses to this that will be available until the 7th of June. Now, not to be pessimistic, but I feel like, you can write as many responses as you like. This is happening whether we like it or not. This is a global thing. Yeah. I think it will take for our freedoms to be really quite obviously snatched away for people to actually wake up and smell the coffee. I mean, even then, it's sort of dubious.
That's what just our freedoms were quite literally snatched away, and we were told that we won't be left out of our homes.
But that wasn't enough for them. I mean,
with injection.
In my mind, I'm thinking, will it take like a government enforced curfew with sirens dotted about and the military like forcibly dragging people into their homes and not allowing them out? Like, what will it take? I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had a reflection just with a friend, a colleague today over lunch, and I said that perhaps this is in the wisdom of the infinite wisdom, because this was done to us in terms of 77 Brigade military psyops.
Yeah, this
was done to us gradually. It was done. The fact we're waking up to it during COVID. Let's not believe that prior to waking up for it, it wasn't happening. We just weren't seeing it, and by definition, because it was prior to us waking up to it.
Yeah.
So this has been done to us so incrementally that we've got to a point now where, as you just alluded to, Dominique, locking the entire world down, 70% of the populated planet, whatever it is, that fact, whichever percentage it is, locking them down until they consent to an injection that they're told comes with consequences if they don't agree, which is the definition of coercion, right?
Exactly.
Now that didn't wake people up. So that shows me that this has been done to us over many years, to a point where people are that dead inside or numb that they're not seeing what's going on right in front of their faces, right? So point being that if that's the case, then maybe in the wisdom of the infinite, it needs to be retreated from gradually, because what also can happen in a Hegelian sense of problem, reaction, solution, which again, the powers that be would capitalize and did during World War II, with the double financing of the Nazis, by the way, and their opponents. Big money, international finance funded both sides. Because once you realize the debate's been lost, but you still want tyrannical power, another thing you can do is pivot and encourage the anger even more, and then another Hitler arises, and you're still in charge, right? Because you're the one that funded the rise of that person. So maybe in the infinite wisdom, maybe this awakening needs to be at a pace that is slower than what we can even logically try and digest. Like, what the hell is wrong with people, But sometimes I seek solace in that maybe there's a wisdom there. That doesn't mean we become fatalistic. We do everything we can to help do good, right? And that doesn't mean we sit back. No. We have a saying in Arabic is Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar. And it's a Quranic saying. It means that we have to command what is good, or order with go forward with what is good, and prohibit the evil or what is recognized as evil. So we have to remain active, but also maybe there's a wisdom in the speed at which it's allowed to happen, which is beyond our control. Because sometimes I look at the situation, such is the anger, that people are right now, they're lapping up polarizing and polarized solutions and language to this problem, like people sending death threats from National Action to people, whether we agree with them or not. Who was it? Forgive me.
Are you talking about Dr. Shola Moss?
Yeah, whatever that allegation is. But what I've not looked at it beyond noticing that there's an increase in polarization happening.
Yeah.
And I think that it's easy to capitalize that. And it's easy to turn that into precisely the thing we're trying to stop. And it's why I was critical of Kanye's language, for example.
Yeah.
Because you end up in a situation where the point you're making is lost in the way. I know how easy it is to steer that anger and turn it into an equal and opposing force of anger still.
Oh yeah, I completely, that really does resonate, because I mean, it's about action reaction. So if you commit to something in a way that's angry and in a way that's vengeful, that's the sort of energy that you're going to attract. So yeah, I do agree with that. But I think with that, there is a positive. I think there is currently. I don't know if, I mean, you're probably familiar with the term. I think there is a great awakening where people, millions of people, actually far more people than we realize, because do you know what's funny is the people that are the most awake, they don't engage with the news, they don't engage with social media, so we don't even know these people exist. A lot of these people are actually off the grid.
They just from nowhere for big protests. So where did you guys come from?
Yeah, exactly. These people are completely off the grid. I remember a really cool conversation I was having with a taxi driver, and he was like, "I don't know what on earth you're talking about, because I don't watch the news. All they do is pump out negativity. Why do I need to watch that? I don't know about any of this." So there is a great awakening, and it's positive. But I agree with you. I think the pace at which the change happens will be slower than we like, but I'm just hoping and praying it won't be when it's too late, when we're literally hooked up to the fucking cloud and can't think for ourselves.
That's smart.
But they've shut down the mechanisms for solidarity. That's what, when you talk about the creep up to this, that's why you'll get the postman, you'll get the cab driver, they'll all talk about how this is happening with COVID or that's happening but the issue is, when there's no mechanism for solidarity, remember, it's easy to mobilize the mob. It's always easy to mobilize the mob. It's that small group that's organized that make the difference. Now, the reason you're seeing this happen in Nigeria is because if you're looking at places that are corrupt, you've got Nigeria and Pakistan. I think Nigeria's just above Pakistan with being one of the most corrupt governments. Now, remember, in India, Modi got rid of the higher value notes. Was
this in 2016?
Because
that's what the journalist Nick Kabishley referenced. So it happened similarly in 2016
in India. And the reason they do this is because in third world countries, you've already got the huge gap between rich and poor. So the authoritarian understanding is already there from a certain perspective of, well, that's just the way things are. You remember the conversation we had, Maajid, with a certain individual that talked to us about how the upper class deserved all of the wealth of Pakistan because they were competent.
Right.
And there was a slave class.
So because Pakistan has just gone through a larger scale problem than the scale, regrettably, than even what you described, in the sense of allegations by the Prime Minister that the CIA got rid of him after he was in Russia visiting Putin while the Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, and he had no idea that was going on. I've been these things are scheduled for years in advance, and I went there for oil negotiations. He's not going to call me and tell me that he's about to invade a country while I was there. So he then made allegations of a CIA orchestrated coup and the consequences for Pakistan not voting in the Western Hemisphere's favor at when decisions were being attempted to be made at the UN level.
Right.
So he made all these allegations. These days, he's in videos attempting to calm it down because the thing went mad. The country exploded. He's now backtracking on some of it. Usman, I don't know if you caught that. He's saying,
but the cognitive dissonance. Look, the issue here is because we're in that mode now of imagination and cognitive dissonance. People don't want to step up. You might get the little. We might get the little protest with a couple of people with boards out on the streets, or we might even get in the third world countries, you might get the rage coming out. But the difference is over there, the military will just pull out the guns, start shooting, and once people start dying, that this lack of solidarity that we have And you have to remember, part of that is the generations that have been created now over the last 2 decades, where it's like hyper individualism. Yeah, and yeah, hyper individualism is very interesting because, like I said before, yeah, there's no deference given to any mastery nowadays. It's all hacking. You go, you get a bit of information, you present it, and everyone can be famous. Everyone can have their channel, have their show, have their TikTok, and in that sense, you present yourself. And it's enough for you to present yourself and be recognized as something. But the problem with that is you value yourself too much then, don't you? This isn't, the Persians are going to invade. Let's go to Thermopylae and fight them at the hot gates to protect our children. This isn't that. This isn't like our teacher teaches us, your body belongs to your ancestors and it belongs to your children and it belongs to your family. But the problem is, the issue with this is when your body belongs to yourself as a presentation, which is what we've got nowadays, there's a hollowness and a lack of deference and a lack of value given to those generations that are coming. And we will see what happens with it. Sorry, Maajid?
Lack of respect for tradition.
Because you can't have tradition and it's interesting that we're talking about Nigeria right now because the last few weeks I've spent with like Sid and Ahmed and these guys talking to them about the rich history of Nigeria, about the fact that 650 years ago, before Galileo had talked about the Earth being round, they'd measured the distance between the Earth and the Moon by looking. That they knew that the Earth was round, that this was the land of scholars and poetry, and I said to the boys, I go, look, when we go to Nigeria, you'll see us in a different with a different mode. Go to those. One of my go-to places is to go to Timbuktu, to the mud mosques that they've got over there. Do you see what I mean? And
that was targeted as well, by the way.
But the mud mosques were.
The entire city was targeted by militia. It was very sad. It was very sad. They burnt down a lot of stuff there.
It's interesting because this is coming back to the original Boko Haram, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the point was the term Boko Haram.
Interestingly, Ukrainian weapons.
are
apparently equipping Boko Haram.
Really? Black market weapons?
Yeah.
From Ukraine, yeah?
Yep.
Now, by the way, I'm conscious of your time, Dominique. So, this is not me kicking you off. If you want to stay, you're more than welcome to. But I do want to give you the opportunity, if you do need to rush off. You've had a long day. You did speak to me beforehand. So, but it's up to you if you would love to have carry on speaking to you.
I mean, I am really tired, guys. So I am gonna have to dash off. But I mean, is there anything else that you wanted me to sort of expand upon?
I think here's the thing: is follow what happens to this story, because one of the things I was happy with is that in Southend in Essex they retreated from the 15-minute city proposal after a brief campaign, whereas in Oxford they didn't retreat.
They've just said it's happening whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and what I suspect is it because Paris and all the other, that's all going to come whether Southend retreat remains permanent or not. I think it's going to come everywhere. So I think this is a story that's going to keep developing, and so we'd love to have remain in touch with you about this. Because,
sure. I mean, I was going to say that there was a development yesterday on the Nigeria front. I've just come across it here. It says Nigeria's push for the e-Naira, which has faced numerous setbacks in recent months, is now facing a new challenge on the technology front. According to a Bloomberg report published Tuesday, the African nation is in talks with new potential technology partners to find a better system to manage its central bank digital currency. And I won't bore you with all the details, but basically the aim of it is to give the central bank of Nigeria actually greater control over that technology to actually directly manage its rollout. So when we talk about governments being able to track and trace your transactions or actually participate in financial discrimination, this is the sort of stuff we are talking about. You know, as CBDCs are a terrible idea. I mean, you know, we know about the whole idea of carbon points that, you know, the World Economic Forum psychopaths have talked about continually. If, you know, for example, you could use too many of your carbon points and your transactions are blocked, or you could participate in online activity or a protest that's inconvenient for the government and they could just stop you from accessing your money. We saw it in Canada. So these are some real ramifications that will happen if people don't wake up, unfortunately. So yeah, really, really important, especially with that development as well, because it's obviously been a failure and now they're actually seeking greater control. They don't care about the fact that most people are not using it. It's an agenda, and with that, the whole world is watching.
What's so scary is it's not just, okay, let me leave Britain and go where? Pakistan, Nigeria. It's coming everywhere. It's a global.
Yeah.
They're going to teach you with the stick, aren't they? They'll teach you to move with you'll get hit with that rod, and you get taught to move. And the difference with this is that, like we talked about before, when COVID was happening, what was it that Sheikh Ali was saying to us, Maajid? There's going to be a cognitive shift.
Yeah.
Straight. Yeah. While COVID was happening, our teacher was saying to us, he goes, look, there'll be a cognitive shift. Yep. And that's exactly the thing that happened. But the point is now that the next level of this means that there needs to be solidarity in terms of information, because what we've got too much of, Dominic, right now is all of the we on the other side, you've got the woke group and everything else. They're all they join their dots and they get together and they've got a connected effort. On the other side, everything's detached. Everyone's, and what we've got to do is we've got to get some solidarity and get the education out there.
Yeah.
So it needs to be and it needs to be hitting constantly. It needs to be at the top of the algorithms rather than at the bottom.
Yeah, but that's the difficulty though, because when it comes to the woke groups, they have the backing of the whole establishment. So it really is easy for them to organize. It really is easy for them to believe they're right when you just click, type in on Google any major issue that the wokies are actually pushing, and they have the fully fledged support of the media, the royal family. They have so much support. It's an unequal footing.
that is basically wokeism is appropriated conscious movements. That's what it is. It's the corporate, it's the corporate appropriation of conscious awakenings. Yeah.
But there's a way to do this because the physical realm as well. So you connect this to what we were talking about with the physical realm, and you get out there, and you create the consciousness, because on here, fair enough, it can seem like they're ruling the world, but out there everyone's going, well, I didn't vote for this. You start going out and everyone's like turning around and going, who did actually vote for this?
Exactly.
Any of it. All right, Dominic, we're gonna let you go. Thank you for your time, and
nice to meet you, Dominic.
Please feel like this is a home just to riff and speak to us about emerging issues, what's on your mind. As you can see, it's very casual. It's not the radical show. That was more formal and organized. This is more, we're in our basement and we're having a chat. So you're welcome anytime. Thank you.
All right, brilliant. Speak soon then. Bye.
Right.
Take care.
So that brings us to the end of our guests today. But what are your reflections?
For the horror show, Maajid, we're scaring people.
I'm scaring you, am I, as well?
Well, no, we're scaring people with the information. I'm saying
it's sad, right? Though this is happening. This is real. This is the real world. It's out there.
We need to. The thing is, though, it really is a case of people need to get together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then it needs to get. We need to build that awareness.
Yeah.
Because everyone's got 5 people next to them, and they've got 5 people next to them. Do you see what I mean? But what's going to end up happening is that before you know it, you're sitting there without the energy to do anything. Because remember, you're like, age will catch up with you at a certain point, and you're going to be sitting there and you're going to be like, okay, why isn't anyone saying anything? And they'll have the person next to you will probably have a VR set on, enjoying themselves, and you'll be like, what happened to reality? So that's where it's moving to now. They're showing us that
it's easy to lose heart and to become depressed about it. But actually, I think this is an ancient struggle that has a similar pattern throughout history, and in fact, tradition has warned of it over and over again. And so the solutions are as ancient, and the work against it to oppose it spiritually is as ancient. And I think that's why
the thing is, though, the challenge is now, isn't it?
And it's difficult.
Even from the spiritual thing, that word spiritual isn't about imagining and sitting back, which is what a lot of people they can get stuck in whatever type of temple they're in, and told, don't worry, everything will be all right. But it's about, what are you going to do now? Because that point that you're looking at, whichever sage you're looking at, whether it's Jesus or Buddha, they were doing things there and then.
That's right.
They weren't waiting.
Well,
and that's the lesson.
It's also easy to abuse that, right? To create nihilism on purpose, and therefore to create submission.
Yeah, and that's what they've done.
Yeah,
there's consequence with all of this. We're talking about culture. We're talking about what China's doing. We're talking about what Russia's doing. But as soon as we sit back and go, okay, what is everyone up to here? What is the right side? And that's a scary question, because this isn't the Cold War anymore. The Cold War used to be quite simple, didn't it? Yeah. When Clint Eastwood went to steal Firefox, it was simple. It was like, no, the Russians, the commies can't have the powerful jet. So everyone's behind Clint Eastwood. Yeah. But there's no more Clint Eastwood anymore, is there? And, everything's ambiguous.
And Rambo.
It's all the anti-hero now, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway.
Look at Biden's.
We're gonna keep scaring
Biden's laptop.
We do. We're scaring people.
Hunter Biden's laptop, Maajid. That's the thing at the end of the movie that you catch the bad guy with.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there are no consequences. Zero.
So it's like, what is the moral of the story that you're in?
Yeah.
What's the moral of your story? The moral of the story is, don't worry, you'll be dead soon. You can go to heaven. The earth is unjust. No, it isn't.
Yeah. So don't do anything about it.
Don't do anything about it.
Yeah.
It's just the way things are.
Yeah.
Don't watch the news. And this is the problem with all of this, that we've got to build the awareness. This has been my conversation today, Maajid. Today's conversations have been, okay, this person, that person, But people want to sit, they want to hear, we've got to build the awareness.
All right, we're going to call it. And back next week, same time, same place. Trying to think, did I confirm a guest yet that I can announce?
Well, we never say anyway. We always leave it as a surprise. Wait for the trailer, people.
Yeah, well,
wait for the trailer.
But we're speaking to a few interesting people actually. But let's see who it will be. But same time, the podcast file will of course go out as usual on maajidnawaz.substack.com, and Warrior Creed is same time every week, 6 p.m. UK time via Rumble. And we thank you all for joining us. And Usman, bro, I'll see you soon.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors. Damn!
shit was dope.